Which transfers will make the biggest impacts for the Louisville football team next season? We'll answer that on this episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university and various sports. I want to take this time to thank you personally for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is going to be football centered. We are going to identify and analyze the three transfers that I believe are going to make the biggest respective impacts for the Louisville Cardinals football team next season. Those three are Tennessee running back Tiyon Evans, Central Arkansas wide receiver Tyler Hudson, and Temple safety MJ Griffin. We will start out with the first in the sequence, that is Tennessee transfer running back Tiyon Evans. And before we kind of break down what Tiyon Evans brings to the Cardinals backfield, let me say this just so the objective of this episode doesn't kind of get lost by the wayside or get misinterpreted. In no way am I coming out here and saying that these are the only three transfers that are going to make big impacts for Louisville this season or this upcoming season. Because I think that, Scott Satterfield and company have done a great job of addressing the needs of the team through the transfer portal, especially at the defensive back position. And a lot of those guys are going to see some quality snaps and will play some big time roles for this team in the fall. But in terms of the biggest impacts, I think that these three are kind of where I'm gravitating towards. Tiyon Evans, specifically speaking, the Tennessee transfer running back has been one that it seems like many services like ESPN and other like social media accounts on Twitter are identifying as, a possible top 50 running back in the country. It does go without saying that the touches are going to be limited in the Cardinals backfield. Obviously, you have Malik Cunningham, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country, is going to get, his fair share of touches in terms of carries, but also, you have a pretty crowded backfield. Jalen Mitchell is going to get his carries. Travion Cooley is coming off of a very, very solid freshman campaign. And then you have the likes of guys like Jawar Jordan, who at the end of the season was putting together some solid performances, especially the one against Air Force in the bowl game. Evans this past season for the Volunteers, 81 carries for 525 yards. That's 6.5 yards per carry, to go along with 6 touchdowns. Had some big-time moments this season. You look at some of his performances that he really stood out against South Carolina, 16 carries, 119 yards, and a touchdown. Had 15 for 156 and 3 touchdowns against Missouri. And then to start the year against Bowling Green, had 16 for 120 and a touchdown and 15 for 41 and a touchdown against Tennessee Tech. So I think, respectively speaking, is he going to be a player that comes in and leads the ACC in yardage? Probably not. But here's the thing. I don't think that that's what Louisville needs. They need an explosive guy, a big-time speed guy, just a player that is able to get into the second wave of the defense and really become a home run threat. I'm not saying that Jalen Mitchell and Travion Cooley cannot fit that mold, because I do think that those guys have some deceptive speed, mostly known as power backs. They do have some solid speed as well. Tiyon Evans reminds me, let me say this, the addition of Tiyon Evans kind of gives me like Michael Dyer vibes, transferring from Auburn to Louisville, and I think maybe Michael Dyer might have went to JUCO before he came to Louisville, but I digress. I think that the point speaks for itself. Obviously, he's not a national champion where Dyer was as a freshman playing with Cam Newton. I think that this addition could be Michael Dyer-esque in the sense of, you remember when Michael Dyer was added to this Cardinals backfield, he brought a different dynamic and a different level of explosiveness to this team that, it was a rotation of guys starting in the backfield. So, there will be games based upon matchups where I think Tiyon Evans will get the start. I think there will be games where Jalen Mitchell gets the start. And the same can be said for Trevion Cooley. It's going to be a matter of feeding the hot hand, kind of like how the Cardinals did this past season. But Tiyon Evans standing in the role that Hassan Hall left, I think that this is where, Louisville's rushing attack could get very, very interesting because you have all of the boxes checked off. You have your power backs in Jalen Mitchell and Trevion Cooley. You have your speed backs and, Jawar Jordan. Then you have kind of a home run threat, very explosive option in Tiyon Evans. And I was talking to a couple of people that live in Knoxville that are huge Tennessee fans, that basically kind of told me right after, Evans committed to Louisville, I remember them telling me you could be looking at a player that gets drafted next season due to his overall explosiveness. We hated to see him go, but he was definitely fun to watch. In the SEC, he was successful against teams in the SEC, and he was going to be successful should he have stayed in Knoxville to play for the Volunteers this upcoming season. But now he's in the ACC, and I just think that the appreciation for Tiyon Evans from the Tennessee fans that I know and am close with, I think that that's what speaks volumes to me and speaks volumes to the type of player that he could be. And I think that Louisville's offensive ceiling is going to be reached if Tiyon Evans is giving you, what you saw glimpses of last season for Tennessee. So he's my first, transfer in this episode that I think is going to have a big impact. And like I said, it might not necessarily be a situation where he rushes for over 1,000 yards. I think that the only player that's going to do that this season is going to be Malik Cunningham. And even that, might be a little bit up in the air. But, being, kind of the change of pace back, 5'11", 220 pounds, has a ton of strength. But just like I mentioned, that, that second wave ability to get into the heart of the defense and really make things happen. A home run threat in every sense of the term. So I do love, the addition here. I think that it's what the Cardinals need to replace Hassan Hall. And I think that there's a little bit more of a higher ceiling and maybe a lower floor, a higher ceiling and a higher floor, meaning that it's a safe addition, but also you're possibly raising the ceiling of this offense. And it's a player that, like I said, just having success at such a high level this past season, his first year at Tennessee, what is going to be expected of him in terms of his role. I'm interested to see how, Scott Satterfield and Lance Taylor really delegate the carries and the workloads in the backfield respectively. So at the end of the day, I think Evans is probably the first transfer on this list. It's not really rankings like 1, 2, 3, but I think in terms of excitement, Evans is right up there in terms of any player on this Louisville offense. It's going to be very, very fun to watch him play at Cardinal Stadium and for Scott Satterfield this upcoming season. But another player offensively that I am super duper excited for is Central Arkansas wide receiver transfer Tyler Hudson. We're going to discuss why here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Do yourself a favor. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and, of course, big boards. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Speaking of making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day, if you follow the Locked On Louisville Twitter page at LO_Louisville, or if you follow me personally, as you can see the Twitter handle in the graphic below, you are likely aware that the Locked On Louisville Twitter page has surpassed 500 subscribers, a huge accomplishment for myself and for the podcast. I'm very, very appreciative of everyone for their continued support of this show. We're quickly coming up on the 1-year launch on August 2nd. We still have a couple months to go, but with over 50 episodes on YouTube now and just having 500 subscribers, it means a ton to me. I can't begin to thank you all. Not even just those on YouTube, but also, listening on whatever audio streaming services you may have. So definitely appreciate you there. And excited for this journey to continue. Speaking of excited for the journey, I'm very, very intrigued by the addition of Central Arkansas wide receiver Tyler Hudson, who now comes into a Louisville offense to where, kind of like last season, the depth chart is all but certain. You don't necessarily have a set depth chart. Amari Huggins-Bruce is going to get a ton of, targets and stuff like that, but you're losing Tyler Harrell. You lose Justin Marshall. Jordan Watkins has transferred as well. So, you return Marshawn Ford, who is a hybrid tight end wide receiver, in my opinion. So there's going to be some targets there. But in an offense to where the ball is in Malik Cunningham's hands a lot, and in running situations as well, the targets might not necessarily be what he saw last season at Central Arkansas, to where he posted 62 receptions for 1,229 yards and 8 touchdowns, averaging 19.8 yards per carry. When you kind of go on Google and you search ACC breakout stars or top ACC newcomers, when the Louisville Cardinals are mentioned, more oftentimes than not, Tyler Hudson's name is thrown out there. The FCS All-American has a ton to offer. 6'2", 195-pound sophomore out of Spring, Texas. Actually, have been to Spring, Texas. Got a speeding ticket in Spring, Texas, coming back from a Houston Rockets game on the way back to the hotel after we had stopped at Whataburger. And my only memory of going through the town of Spring, Texas, is getting a traffic citation for speeding. So there's that. That's the first time I see Spring, Texas. I'm like, oh, that's where I got my traffic ticket at. But regardless, back on topic, Tyler Hudson kind of reminds me a lot of Dez Fitzpatrick. Does a lot of things very, very solid. Might not have one aspect of his game to where it's like, oh, he's a speed receiver, or oh, he's a vertical threat, or he is every time he touches it, it's a possible house call. He just does a lot of things very solid. Just an overall solid wide receiver. Does a great job of high pointing the football with his 6'2" frame. I think he has a ton of athleticism and speed. And he's just great in terms of route running as well. Route running is probably the aspect I'm most excited about when it comes to Tyler Hudson. So next season for the Louisville Cardinals, as I mentioned, the target shares are to be determined. Obviously, Amari Huggins-Bruce is going to get his share of targets. You're going to see, Marshawn Ford get targets as well. Josh Johnson may be the player that we see slide into that role with the absence of Tyler Harrell. I know the statuses of Braden Smith and Devon Mortimer are kind of up in the air, but I do think that you have a handful of speed guys, but Tyler Hudson kind of projects to be wide receiver 1 in this offense. I think D. Wiggins is your direct replacement for Justin Marshall. Tyler Hudson's probably in my opinion, going to be one of the biggest ACC breakout stars of the college football season coming up. I'm very, very excited for what it is that he has to offer. Now, don't let it get misconstrued. I don't think that he's going to replicate what he did this past season for Central Arkansas that saw him land on second-team All-American lists. And that's kind of due to the fact that Louisville's offense is mainly predicated on the run, but also when they do throw the ball, Malik Cunningham has a handful of weapons to choose from, and at tight end, at running back, and also the wide receiving core. So I don't see a situation where Tyler Hudson is not a starter coming into the season. Sorry, I feel like I say this all the time. I get parched, during these episodes, just talking for 30 minutes at a time. So I do apologize for those that listen to audio. I was taking a drink, so I do apologize for the long break and the silence, but we got to get some type of fluids going. Maybe not the healthiest option with a Coca-Cola, but it'll serve its purpose for the remainder of the show. But back on topic, and I'm getting way off topic when talking about getting a traffic citation in Texas to drinking Coca-Cola during the show, and obviously my allergies, if you can't tell, are absolutely kicking my butt. But back on topic, I won't go off on a tangent too much. Overall, this Louisville offense has the potential to be better than it was last season. Not only does a good portion of the offensive line come back, your running back committee's back, and you add, a direct. I think it's an upgrade over Hassan Hall and Tiyon Evans. And wide receiver wise, it'll be interesting to see what the comparison is from watching Jordan Watkins in this offense to now Tyler Hudson. I think you're really going to kind of see more of a Dez Fitzpatrick approach to where, it might not necessarily seem like he's doing much in a game. Then you look up at the box score and it's like, oh, wow, the guy's got 6 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown. So it is what it is. This Louisville offense, you have to take everything into context, considering the fact that the target shares might not necessarily be enough to warrant like ACC all-conference honors, but I don't necessarily think that takes away the possibility of him just making an overall big impact on this team. So we talked about Tiyon Evans. We talked about Tyler Hudson. Defensively speaking, there are a slew of defensive transfers, especially at the defensive back positions. One of those players, MJ Griffin, one of the first transfers into the team out of the transfer portal, I think is going to play the biggest impact on the defensive side of things. We're going to talk about why that is here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Built Bar. I mentioned to you all on yesterday's episode and throughout the past week, Built Bar sent me a care package with the birthday cake puffs, which for those who don't know what the puffs are, they are a protein-infused marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. I am already finished with those. They were absolutely, they're absolutely delicious. I'm not a huge fan of protein bars because they're chalky to me. They're waxy. They're hard to choke down. But Built Bar's just been a little different. I've been a fan of their protein bars for the past couple months, but their puffs are really changing the game. All of their products are covered in 100% real chocolate. The variety of flavors is astounding. You have to check out all of the healthy benefits. You can do that at built.com. And while you're there, use the promo code LOCKED15 on the shopping cart and get 15% off your order. Once again, that's using the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. The final segment of the show, discussing the transfers that I believe are going to make the biggest respective impacts for the Louisville football team this upcoming season. The first two were dedicated to Tiyon Evans and Tyler Hudson. And the final segment is over on the defensive side of things in the form of safety transfer MJ Griffin. Played 3 years at Temple. 2019 only had 1 tackle. 2020, 2020 saw a little bit of an uptick in snaps, 22 total tackles. And this past year, 66 total tackles was one of the biggest bright spots on that Temple defense. Had a fumble recovery, 1 sack, has not had 1 interception in his time up in Philadelphia. The 6'1", 200-pound. He's actually, I think it's a COVID freshman or COVID sophomore, because I think he redshirted in 2019, and then you get an extra year of eligibility. So having a possible multiple year starter for this Louisville defense is extremely valuable for this for the secondary for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you have to replace Qwynnterrio Cole. It is huge news that the team was able to retain the services of Kendrick Duncan Jr. I thought for certain that he was going to go to the NFL. He decides to come back for his final collegiate season. But Qwynnterrio Cole goes to the league, gets picked up by the Las Vegas Raiders as an undrafted free agent. Very, very excited for his journey, and hopefully he gets some big time snaps year one. But in terms of MJ Griffin, I think kind of brings a lot of that same skill set and the strengths that you saw from Qwynnterrio Cole. Could be a type of player that can be top 5 on the team in tackles. I think that he's one of the safeties that does a great job in the run game. Solid tackler in terms of his technique. His pursuit is ferocious. I love the way he's able to kind of swarm the ball, travel sideline to sideline. And also, although the numbers might not necessarily be there, I think that he is underrated in terms of coverage. But having a player that can replicate some of that, production that you saw from Q Cole last year, to where you saw a hard-hitting safety that did a great job of making sure opposing running backs and opposing ball carriers did not get into the second line of the defense, and also do a solid job off the edge. Having a guy like MJ Griffin there for that reason is big. He's going to have an impact essentially right away. I think that he'd probably be the starter at the other safety position opposite of Kendrick Duncan Jr. And that's huge to have a veteran slide into that role, because you have guys like Josh Meekins Jr., Jalen Alexander, so on and so forth. Shaverick Williams, who's also in that group. There is Ben Perry, which could possibly see time going from safety to outside linebacker. Chandler Jones, also versatile, going from cornerback to safety, depending on who steps up in the cornerback room. There are a lot of different options that Scott Satterfield, Brian Brown, Wesley McGriff, and Greg Gasparato can use in the back half of the Louisville secondary. So I'm very interested to see how that turns out. But I think MJ Griffin is the defensive transfer outside of, Momo Sanogo, because I think that he's going to do a solid job of stepping up in the absence of CJ Avery in that role. But I think MJ Griffin comes into a position of need here at Louisville, to where secondary is kind of the question mark of, okay, what's the scheme going to be like? Are we going to see any, schematic changes this season? Maybe, more of a defensive approach, to where they don't necessarily allow a lot of space at the line of scrimmage. That's an interesting, question that needs to be answered. But also from a personnel standpoint, you lost a lot of depth this past offseason. They have addressed that through the transfer portal, but it's up to, some of these players to step up. I think MJ Griffin is a player that I kind of saw right away when he opted to transfer. I'm like, this is Qwynnterrio Cole's replacement. Plays extremely similar to him, has a similar build, and is just very, very solid in the run game. So not having a huge drop-off. I'm not saying that he's going to do what Q Cole did last year, or, have the same numbers as he did. But if you can even get 75% of Cole's production from last year, especially as a possible multiple year starter, that continuity is, the significance cannot be understated for the Louisville Cardinals, for Scott Satterfield, that is, trying to find some consistency in the back half of his defense. And they're going to be able to do that this season with a lot of returning guys. So, like I mentioned, a lot of these transfers could have big-time impacts on the team next season. I do think that Tiyon Evans, Tyler Hudson, and MJ Griffin are going to be the three that are going to leave the 3 biggest impacts, respectively. So, tomorrow's episode, Jeremy Wallman will likely be on the show to discuss some more football stuff and any news that goes down. Obviously, it goes without saying, Jermaine Lole, the Arizona State defensive lineman, has not committed to the Cardinals. If he were to do so, while this episode is being released, know that this was recorded on Wednesday evening. So obviously can't factor in Lole into that situation. But if Lole were to commit, then he would definitely make this list, this short list of, transfers that are going to make the biggest impacts. For all of your ACC news, there's no better place to get that than the Locked On ACC podcast hosted by Candace Cooper. Be sure to check that out. As always, thank you so much for 500 YouTube subscribers. It has been a fun journey. It's been kind of a tough one getting the podcast back off the ground, but I cannot state how appreciative and grateful I am for every one of you for sharing, liking, listening, subscribing, rating the podcast on whatever avenue, streaming service, or platform that you use. All I ask is that you continue to share the word. Leave some comments in the comment section or on social media. Send me any questions that you would like addressed in the mailbag. Leave any comments of suggestions for improvement, for segment ideas, guest ideas, and so on and so forth. Tell me what you think about these topics. I want to have some conversations. I took over this, responsibility to host the Locked On Louisville podcast to be able to start healthy conversations between the Louisville fan base, and I want to hear your all's conversations. Thank you to everyone that is voicing their thoughts. That's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. We will see you right back here tomorrow.